Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. This is Kathi Hoke. I'm the director of the Legal Resource Center for Public Health Policy, and we are excited to have you join us today for this webinar related to enforcement of tobacco control laws related to the Tobacco 21 bill passed by the Maryland General Assembly this year. I'm joined today by Brooke, Torton, and Blair Inniss of the Legal Resource Center, and they will introduce themselves when they start their presentation. I just wanted to remind folks that we actually can't hear you. All of the participants are muted on this call, but there is a chat box through the webinar program. If you have any questions, feel free to chat them there. If you have questions that you don't want to put in the chat box or you'd like to speak with us about after the webinar, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is available online, but also on the slide deck here. So we're happy to work with you one-on-one with any questions that you might have. I would encourage you to write questions in the chat box, however, because if you're having the question, maybe others on the phone are having the question or don't realize that they have the question, and we can answer it for everybody at the same time. Depending on how much time we have, if we run out of time or need to do follow-up on any of the questions, we will make sure that everyone who has registered for the webinar receives a response to the question that we will write up afterwards. So we want to thank the Maryland Department of Health for their generous funding of the Legal Resource Center and for collaborating with us on today's webinar. I do want to point out that I know we have a lot of attendees to this webinar who might not be our regular attendees. So welcome to the law enforcement community who we've invited to be on this call. Typically, we have our local health department folks and other health-oriented folks on the phone, but we wanted to invite the law enforcement community since you're such an integral part of our enforcement processes throughout Maryland. The other caveat I want to issue is that while the Legal Resource Center did evaluate the Tobacco 21 provision and follow it during the course of the legislative session and keep all of our folks updated on how it was progressing through the legislature. We are not advocates, we are not lobbyists, so we don't take a position on whether a provision should or should not have been included or excluded from this law. We are facing now the reality that this particular bill, as it was passed, will go into effect on October 1st. So if you don't like parts of it, if you do like parts of it, we won't take the blame nor the credit for any of those things. Our role is to really help you in understanding what the law is and answer any of those questions related to enforcement processes now that this is part of our law. So on that note, I will turn things over to Brooke Torton, who is going to get started with the slide deck.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. The past several months, we've received so many questions about Tobacco 21, what it might mean for you, and we've sort of compiled information and put together this webinar to be responsive really to what we thought you all wanted to know. And of course, at the end, we will certainly leave significant time for questions, and we can hopefully answer those. But if you forget something and have a question after, our contact information, our email is posted, and many of you have it as well. And so we're happy to answer any follow-up questions. All right, so just what you can expect to hear from us today. What does and doesn't the new law do? What existing provisions does it change? I mean, that's probably perhaps the most common. You can kind of lump any of the questions we've received really into those categories. So we're going to be providing a brief outline for you. Civil and criminal enforcement. How has the Tobacco 21 bill, how has that changed our current civil and criminal enforcement laws? What do those now look like? And military exemption and enforcement. So I would say we actually received the most questions with respect to this specific provision. So we are going to go over what that looks like, what type of ID retailers need to see and check in order to comply with that provision. We'll also hear a little bit about how this law has changed use as far as purchase, use, and possession laws, and what can still be done, especially in the school setting with respect to their access, their use. We'll also talk a little bit about what options some of the local governments have. And Blair Inniss, our staff attorney, will be talking about the bills, if you haven't heard, there have been some Tobacco 21 bills introduced at the federal level, which she's been tracking carefully, and she'll talk about those as well. MDH has worked very carefully to create and post their FAQ sheet, which is really helpful. And again, it was really responsive to all of the questions they've received, some that we've received. And then the LRC has put together a fact sheet as well. So I believe you can see it on your screen under handouts. There's a PDF, and you can click it after the presentation today. You can have access to it. We'll be emailing it out as well, and it is on our website. But that is kind of a great outline or summary of much of what you're going to hear from us today. And so we'll also be posting a toolkit in the coming month, and MDH has also other resources. We'll talk a little bit about their work as well. All right, so what does the law do? So Tobacco 21, it increases the legal sales age of tobacco products to 21 years, but it exempts active duty members of the military that are 18 and older who provide valid military ID. So we're going to get into detail about what that means. It's kind of a loaded sentence, loaded language, and we can provide you some better guidelines, parameters of what you can expect for that to mean. It also repeals Criminal Law 10108. I mentioned briefly that the purchase, use, and possession laws for those who are not 18, and now this would be looking at 21, but I'm going to say 18 because before this we were only looking at sales to those under 18. Essentially, they used to be able to be cited for purchasing, using, or possessing these products. That was repealed. So now anyone under 18 and 21 who are in possession of these products, there is no, they cannot be cited legally. There may be some other type of intervention for those in the school setting, and that would just apply to those under 18 for school resource officers. And Kathy's going to talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. The other piece of this, retailers are now required to post signage in the store, and this is notifying and reminding folks that the law is now 21 and older. And MDH, I believe, has created some signs and begun distributing those as well that retailers can use to simplify, streamline that process. All right, what changes were made to current law? So many counties were enforcing the statewide civil citation. That's in our Health General article. It's either 24307 if you're looking at citing someone for possessing electronic smoking devices, or you're looking at 24307 if you're looking at tobacco products, other tobacco products, cigarettes. That's what you would cite under. The interesting item here is that the owner or licensee is now responsible for the civil penalty. The clerk will not be responsible for the civil penalty, whether or not the clerk is the one who made the sale. So when citing someone, it will no longer really make sense to cite the clerk because at the end of the day, the owner is the one that will have to pay the fine, and that is a difference. Previously, whoever was cited, either the clerk or the owner, they were the ones who would be responsible. So this is a change with this new law. Electronic smoking devices. So previously, electronic smoking devices were called electronic nicotine delivery systems. We have now altered the name, refer to these as electronic smoking devices, or the acronym ESDs. And they were also not considered to be tobacco products. They were treated separately and distinctly. But what this law did, in addition to changing the name to electronic smoking devices, we are also now considering tobacco products to encompass the meaning of electronic smoking devices. And the definition also changed. It's a little broader now, and technically it could cover products that are using vaporized liquid that has nicotine, that might not have nicotine. It's broader to really encompass a product that might pop up on the market that we may have not anticipated. What doesn't it do? So a lot of these were compiled from some really thoughtful questions we received from folks. Some of them were rumors, which we know the rumor mill can be out of control when a new law passes in any state. But it does not, there's no grandfathering provision for those 18 to 20 years of age. Few states have a grandfathering provision. We're actually up to 18 states, I didn't realize that, up to 18 states that have a statewide law now, and which is really, it's fascinating. We cover more than 50% of the population now with these provisions, along with states that have localities that have passed this law. It covers 50% of the population. And so rarely have we seen a grandfather clause, and we definitely don't have one in this bill, this law. Another question, this does not alter the age of clerks who can continue to sell tobacco products. Nothing here changed the law. In fact, anyone who's under 21 who's working in the course of employment, they are, selling, making a sale behind the counter, a legal sale, of course, they cannot be cited for anything. They can still continue working in that role. Nothing has impacted that. There's also no ID check provision under state law, and I would just point out federal law requires retailers to check ID for those appearing under the age of 27. So, of course, retailers should still continue to do that because they must comply with state and federal law. But there's no required ID check generally. If we're looking at someone who claims to be an active duty member of the military, then there is an ID check provision to prove that status. And a little later on, I'm going to show you what that looks like. This does not alter the statutory citation. You're still citing under Health General 24305 if you're looking at someone who's selling ESDs, or 24307 if someone sold cigarettes or other tobacco products. There's also no taxation that's been created here. Nothing about the definitions or changes has created a tax anywhere. In the future, we might see something like that, but it has nothing to do here now with this bill. And there isn't any modification to the licensing requirements. The definitions changed there. There was some language that changed, but there's no new sort of requirement that has been created. All right, so civil enforcement. You keep hearing me say Health General 24305 and 7. So just to recap, Health General 24305, that's for civil citations for ESDs. Health General 24307 is for cigarettes and other tobacco products. And so who can actually enforce, who can issue these citations? It's law enforcement, county health officers, or designees of county health officers. And none of that has changed. I'm just reiterating because it never hurts to hear these things multiple times. And the fines, they also haven't changed. It's still $300 for the first, $1,000 for the second violation within 24 months of that prior, and then $3,000 for a third or subsequent violation within 24 months of that prior. And so just like I said, the store owner or licensee is now responsible for that civil penalty, even if it was the clerk who made the sale. All right, criminal enforcement. I believe this is used far less, just based on my conversations with counties. I don't believe counties are using this as frequently, but you should know that it is there. It is an option. And criminal law 10107, essentially the clerk or the owner can continue to be cited. So this is the difference here between now the civil and the criminal. And essentially, if somebody is cited criminally, they can be found guilty of a misdemeanor. And so in this circumstance, only sworn law enforcement, just like any other crime, only sworn law enforcement can issue these criminal citations. And the penalties are exactly the same as you saw in the last slide, $300, $1,000, and $3,000. All right, everyone's favorite, completing the uniform civil citation. So I'm focusing on this because this is what most jurisdictions use. And we created a toolkit about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. We're amending it and updating it to reflect what we see with Tobacco 21. So that'll come out in the next month or two. And I just want to show you here what it looks like. And you're going to see it again. You're going to have access to these slides. But just to run through it with you very quickly, you fill in the information at the top. You see citation number, District Court of Maryland. You plug in the county. Calvert County was the lucky example here for whatever reason. We have the address. And then you'll move on. Like I said, you're going to want to put the owner, the store owner here, not the clerk. Because, of course, like I keep saying, citing the clerk isn't going to be very useful since the owner is the one who's going to be responsible for that fine. So what do you write for the owner? Well, either enter the name of that owner or the business, whatever is listed on their license to sell, which should be posted somewhere that you can see in the retail establishment. If it's not, all you can do about that is report it to the Office of the Comptroller. And so as far as service is concerned, that's another issue. When you actually complete service, you need to serve this on the resident agent. And you can find that by searching the Department of Assessments and Taxation website with the information that you find on the license. And that's how you will locate the resident agent. That's who you serve it with. So the resident agent is going to be a different name than the name you've got here in the citation. All right, that is the top half. The second part of the citation, you include the fine, you check that box. You would check where the money should go. I've just conversationally with jurisdictions, I think it's done a little differently. Sometimes they send it to the district court, sometimes it's sent back to the agency, like the health department. The statute says it should go to the agency municipality. I don't want to say if it's not broken, maybe not, don't fix it. I don't think it's going to cause your citation to be thrown out. I know everyone's doing this a little differently, but technically that is what the statute says. And there's some required boxes here you must check as well. We'll talk about that in a little more detail in our toolkit, but I just wanted everyone to have access to this. Again, it never hurts to see this more than once. Okay, so the military exemption. Members of active duty military who are at least 18 years of age may continue to purchase tobacco products as long as they present valid military identification. So after some research and conversations with folks around the state, the only acceptable valid military ID for this purpose, it's the Common Access Card, but specifically what it's called is the Armed Forces of the United States Geneva Convention Identification Card. I only reference that because I want you, if you Google it, I want you to be able to look at it yourself. So here it is. Here it is. This is what the card needs to look like. I've received a lot of questions about color and that type of thing, but it needs to look like this, the format. You see the expiration date on the front. There's a federal identifier. It must have an affiliation for uniformed services. That's very important. So here you see the service agency is Marine Corps, but the cards are white. These are going to be white cards. It's going to look like this. You see pay grade, rank. The date of birth is actually on the back side, so they're going to need to flip that over, and you can see in that bottom blood type. Retailer is not incredibly concerned about that, but they do need to look at the date of birth there on the back of that page. So this is what it must look like.
All right, so briefly, despite the military exemption, no retailer is absolutely required to sell cigarettes to members of the military who are under 21. And we can see this played out by some national retailers. So these are the retailers that have either have or will be implementing Tobacco 21 blanket policies without a military exemption. So Walmart and Sam's Club, they haven't started yet. They'll be starting, oh no, they did, it's July. They'll be I was like, they're starting tomorrow. No, tomorrow's August. So they started at the beginning of this month, requiring a person to be 21 or older to purchase tobacco products. They also discontinued the sale of fruit and dessert flavored electronic nicotine delivery systems, or as we say in Maryland, electronic smoking devices, really going to what the FDA and the Surgeon General has been telling us about this youth vaping epidemic and these fruit flavors enticing the youth to use these products. So Rite Aid, this was an interesting one. They announced in April that they were also going to be switching to a Tobacco 21 policy, but then never actually announced that they formally implemented that policy. So I actually just called them, and they actually did implement the policy starting June 30th of this year. So they also have the Tobacco 21 policy, and they have stopped selling e-cigarettes and vaping products in their stores as well. And then Walgreens had made a lot of news coverage a couple months ago because they were actually, the FDA in their investigations found that Walgreens was one of the top violators where the retailers were actually selling the tobacco products to minors. And so they had a 22% violation rate, so almost 1,800 violations where minors were able to sell cigarettes and other tobacco products. So as part of that, or at least during that time, Walgreens did publicly announce that they also were going to begin their Tobacco 21 policy, which will be beginning in September of this year. Interestingly, during that time, Circle K was also a big violator from the FDA, and we haven't heard anything from them about whether they're going to start a Tobacco 21 policy. So it's definitely something that we'll be listening out for here at the LRC to see if Circle K gets in the game, the Tobacco 21 game as well.
All right, thank you, Blair. This is Brooke again. So just to reiterate, one thing I wanted to mention, active duty, since we're still sort of talking about military and policy, it does not include the full-time National Guard. And I know there has been some concern, folks are not happy about that, but active duty does not include that term for purposes of the definitions that we're looking at here. And so some retailers might decide, this is confusing, I don't want to, it's confusing enough to have to look at this license and figure out, date and time, figure out the birth date, I've got a long line of people. Technically, they could implement a store policy where they don't sell to anybody under the age of 21. And we recognize, of course, that might not be incredibly, popular to deny members of the military that kind of request, but that's really the purpose of what Blair is kind of running through with everyone, is that these companies exist in Maryland, and they will not be selling to folks under 21, even if they're showing a military ID, because that's their policy. And so that's just a really important distinction we wanted everyone to be aware of. All right, so now we are on to youth intervention, and Kathi will talk a little bit about the purchase, use, and possession laws and the changes made there.
So some of you may have heard these referred to as the PUP law. So that PUP part stands for possession, use, and purchase. These laws have been on the books in most jurisdictions for some time. They penalize the youth for purchasing, using, or possessing tobacco products. In Maryland, under the current code, and I say current until October 1st, the current code does provide for a civil citation to minors. Here we're talking about folks under 18 because the T21 provisions aren't in effect. What happens to a youth who is cited under this provision? Well, they are processed through the juvenile justice system. They are seen by a juvenile master, and there is no set penalty. It's not a fine that's listed in the code or any particular punishment that's listed. And so there's discretion, as there is in most juvenile matters, in the juvenile master. We know from some experience the very few citations that are actually issued here often result in the youth being referred to community service, often in a situation where they are going to be learning about the impact of smoking on health or working with cancer patients or the like. And so to the extent that there have been citations issued under this provision, that's the likely outcome. I can say across the country, there is, other approaches have been taken, such as fines or directed to particular community service hours, but we've never had those provisions here in Maryland. But importantly, as of October 1st, those provisions won't be in effect at all anymore. Again, I want to emphasize that there were very few citations issued over the course of the last decade under the PUP laws. So I don't think we're going to see a dramatic shift in any regard. But the PUP provisions have been repealed, and there is no longer a citation for the possession, use, or purchase of tobacco products by someone now, or as of October 1st, for someone under age 21. Why was this change made? There's been a lot of talk about this. It was, I know, incredibly important to the advocates who worked hard to secure this legislation, as well as the sponsors of the legislation, that these provisions be pulled out of the code. And I think there are a variety of reasons. And we see these consistently across the country where they are repealing their PUP provisions. First, there is absolutely no evidence that PUP laws reduce youth access to or use of tobacco products. So there's no evidence base that this law does what it's supposed to do. And so that said, we try to have evidence-based laws on the books. But I think equally important, and something that's less about the actual law itself and more about what we're trying to accomplish here, is that when we have youth as the perpetrators, it is antithetical to what's actually happening out there. We know our youth are actually the target of industry marketing. They have been lured into desiring these products. I think, more recently, when we speak about electronic smoking devices, through social media, through traditional marketing campaigns, they are enticed into trying these products and using these products. So frankly, and then they become addicted. So they are and should be considered the victims here and not the perpetrators. When we compare that with the other side of things, the citations being issued to retailers or to others in the industry for their violations of the law, those are the folks who are making money here. They're the ones who are incentivized to sell to minors because they're making money. And our process of enforcing the laws that prohibit that is designed to disincentivize that. So we know and there is an evidence base for the efficacy there. So if you really look at the real world situation of youth being enticed and lured into buying the product, they can and should be perceived as the victim and not the perpetrator. There's also some concern that PUP laws can and have been used in some cases to essentially agitate within a particular population, or they're used more aggressively with a vulnerable population, that is the entree into an interaction with law enforcement for the minor that may not be appropriate or may push the boundaries. And then probably finally, and probably most important to a lot of the folks on the call, is really a diversion of resources to go out and enforce PUP laws. They're not effective, but we should have the attention focused on the real problem, and that is enforcement at the retail level and higher enforcement of the industry, not marketing to our kids. But that's where the resources and the attention should be, and not on the young people. Rather, should be on the predatory and irresponsible retailers who are selling to kids. And I know each of the local health departments and all of our colleagues working in the public health community from the advocacy perspective provide resources to our young people to help them not be lured in by these messages, and to help them if they do succumb to using the products and are desirous of quitting. And so we do have those resources available to our kids who are using. So there's no reason or need to cite them under the law. So what does that mean in part for our impact in schools? Because we know we got a lot of questions immediately about, well, what are school resource officers to do? Currently they can at least issue a citation. If they're a sworn law enforcement officer, they can issue a civil citation to the minor under the current code. First, let me remind you that there were very few of these citations actually issued to minors. That has not been what we've been seeing throughout Maryland. But it doesn't really change anything. In all of our local school systems, there are prohibitions against the possession or use of tobacco products by students on school property at any time. And school resource officers, school administration, nothing about these regulations is altered, and they are able to enforce them. So just like the student can be subject for discipline for school-based regulation, even if it's not a violation of the state code, they can be subject to school-based discipline for their possession or use of tobacco during the school day. So, instead of thinking that it's taking a tool away, it really isn't. The tools have always been through the school-based policy of discipline for students for violating the school-based policy, and that's what school resource officers and others in the school administration can continue to do. And nothing about the repeal of PUP laws changes that. So I turn it back over to Brooke.
All right. So we have heard from maybe all 24 of our jurisdictions actually on these issues, but many of the jurisdictions, depending on the structure of government, have their own laws on the books already. And of course, those are only prohibiting the sale of tobacco products to those under the age of 18. And so what they've been asking is they really want to know what can they do, what are their options here. So the first the first option I would address is that local governments with these statutes, with these ordinances, they can continue using that if they want. If they just want to continue enforcing under the age of 18 sale, they can do so. But they can also now work to amend their local law to reflect the provisions in the statewide Tobacco 21 law. In fact, I'm talking with 2 or 3 jurisdictions, you're probably on here now, about doing this right now. And of course, the LRC can provide bill drafting assistance, technical assistance if you would require it. Now, for 4 special counties, St. Mary's, Cecil, Carroll, and Garrett, you have a statewide civil citation that is actually codified in the Maryland Code. This was earlier. This is older than the statewide civil citation you see in Health General. This came first. So because of your structure of government, essentially your delegation requested that the state give the authority in these specific counties, these specific instances, to implement these civil citations. So because your law is in the state code, it was already amended to reflect Tobacco 21. So if those are, if that is the law you're enforcing, the one in local government 11203, 11204, yours is already changed. And you can take a look at that. I can work with you and show you what the text says, but it does increase that age of sale to 21. All right, and now we'll hear from Blair about what's happening with Tobacco 21 at the federal level.
Yeah, so you may have seen in the news there are a couple of bills that are actually floating around out there relating to the federal Tobacco 21 laws. And I'm not going to go through each of these individually because really they aren't super different. And more importantly, most of them haven't seen any movement since being introduced. So a lot of them were introduced and got a lot of news and press coverage, and then that was the end of it. So really, the only one that I super duper want to talk about is that last bullet, the Tobacco 221 Act. So this bill is a bipartisan measure, and it by itself actually also wasn't gaining much traction. And then in late June, it was added to a larger healthcare bill called the Lowering Healthcare Costs Bill. And so now we're actually, instead of tracking this Tobacco 221 Act, we are actually going to be tracking that healthcare bill to see what happens, to see if the federal T21 law gets any traction that way. Right now, as it stands, generally speaking, it really is kind of just a blanket prohibition of selling tobacco products to anyone under the age of 21, and that does include e-cigarettes. However, it's because it is actively being heard and testified on, it is open to amendments in Congress. So we do need to keep following that to see what sort of, if any, amendments show up there. You know, there very well could be a military exemption there too, just like we saw in Maryland. The other one that I did want to point out was the third bullet, the Tobacco Free Use Act. That one is the bill that was McConnell and Kane's bill, and I think honestly, out of all of them, it really did get the most news coverage. So I think that's one that we also should be taking a look at to see if that gets any hearings or votes as well. But as of yet, nothing has happened with it, so not really anything to report yet, but we'll keep you updated. And Brooke will come now and talk about the fact sheet.
All right. So like I said at the beginning of the presentation, we have created a fact sheet which really summarizes some of the major provisions of the bill and some of the topics we covered here today. It's tiny. I can hardly read this. I don't expect anyone else here to read this, but we did include it here as a handout. You should be able to see it on the screen under handout. It's a PDF, but we'll be circulating these here as well. And of course, we'll be sending our slides out after the presentation to the registrants as well, and likely they'll be posted on our website, so you'll have as much access to any of this as you need. And here's the backside of the fact sheet. So MTH has also been working, like I said, tirelessly on getting information out to folks, out to retailers, and we just wanted to provide you with a timeline of what they've done here. So they issued their press release right after the bill signing, it looks like, on May 14th. They also submitted retailer FAQs, and that is to their website, notobaccosalestominders.com. And I'll tell you how to get to that on the next slide or so. And there's an email address here. If you have any other additional questions, please feel free to email them. Of course, you can contact us too. We work very closely with them. There's a letter to retailers that appears on the next slide that they sent out in July of 2019. And they're sending a postcard as well in the next few weeks. And like I believe I mentioned earlier on, the signs are going to be submitted before October 1st, so that can assist in enabling the retailers to comply there. And here is just a little copy of the letter that you see here. And these are also, we'll be posting this online, but these are active links too. So you can actually click, and this will take you to the materials that are referenced here. Okay. All right, so in order to access those FAQs, the website here, this is an active link. You can click it, it'll take you there. And what you do is essentially you want to go to notobaccosalestominders.com. you're going to click Tobacco 21 FAQ, that's in the left-hand column. Then you'll select that PDF download, New Tobacco Sales Age T21 Retailer FAQ, and that'll lead you to that page. And so just two of the common questions that we've received, that MDH has received, that you'll see there, is about military identification, which we covered, and you can always reference back to see what the ID should look like. And that question about clerks and employees under the age of 21, can they continue to sell? And of course, the answer is yes. Nothing has impacted that. They may continue to do their jobs. We just also wanted to mention that FDA has age verification calendars, and they are now available. You can order that if you're a local health department. I'm not sure about the limit they place on how many, but those are now available. We get questions about that. So does MDH from time to time. All right, so just a word on tobacco treatment and cessation. It may be that this motivates some tobacco users to quit. It might be that those 18, 19, and 20, because they are not grandfathered in, and now, of course, they're not supposed to be sold these products, it may kind of boost some motivation to try to quit this habit. And so there are some resources here. These are free evidence-based resources. We have the Maryland Tobacco Quit Line. The number is here posted, and there's a website where you can get material. And there's also the This Is Quitting tech support. And this is really the first cessation initiative of its kind. It's really targeted for youth and young adults because, of course, the tech-friendly piece of this. But feel free to click this link, and get some additional information on that. And we do know, just from working very closely with the local health departments, that many of them have programs, if not all of them. And there are many local health departments with specific programming in place targeted toward folks that are younger, on the younger side. And of course, colleges and universities, many enter college under the age of 21, of course, around the age of 18. And so administration and state colleges may decide that they're going to work on notifying students of this policy, especially if there's an out-of-state population, like an 18-year-old who maybe is a smoker might move here and not realize that they should no longer be sold these products legally. And so there's going to be some promotion of tobacco treatment resources at orientation this summer, this fall. All right, so at this time, we are open to questions. I know there was one question about whether we would be distributing these resources. Yes, we'll send out the slides, our fact sheet. You know where to get MDH's fact sheet. Our slides link you there. And of course, please email the website or the email address you saw on the slide where we discussed MDH's initiatives. Email this, email Megan, any of the addresses. Somebody will get you an answer timely, but we are happy to take other questions now as well.
Brooke, I'm just going to step in since we don't have any questions coming into the queue because people are
Shy.
being shy now. So again, feel free to add any questions into the queue if you have them. But I just did want to point out, since we do have maybe some folks on the call who are not regular attendees, we do host, the Legal Resource Center does host a bi-weekly conference call during the legislative session. We will actually start, our first call will be right before the session begins, and then bi-weekly throughout the session, where we track all of the public health law related legislative proposals in a variety of categories. I shouldn't say all, because virtually any bill could be determined to be somehow related to public health. But we track tobacco bills, cannabis bills, alcohol bills, school health bills, environmental health bills, injury prevention legislation, and some other in our kind of miscellaneous category. So number one, anyone is free to join us on those calls, to participate. We love participation, or to even just listen in to the conversations on the calls. As well as anyone can access the charts that we produce. So throughout the course of the session, our law students who are working with us will manage a Google document that will be live, and is, again, once you have the link, it's accessible to you to see, oh, there are these bills that I was interested in tracking, and they will keep updated on when a hearing is going to be held, if there was a vote in committee, when it's going to the floor, you know, what the vote is on the floor, and those sorts of details, as well as a summary of each of the bills that we're tracking. So if you're interested in that, the email address that you see on the screen right now. Just shoot us an email and say, can you please put me on the listserv for the legislative update calls, and we'll make sure that you get the notices of the calls as well as the link to the chart. And again, anyone can participate. You can have the link to the charts and not come on the calls, or you can come on the calls and just listen in or participate. But we just wanted to offer it out because we know we have some folks who might not have heard about that work that we do previously. So again, I see nothing else in the chat. Was there anything, Brooke, that you wanted to add?
No, we're just here for any additional questions that you might have. Maybe you'll go back, look at this, and think of something. So we're happy to answer any questions, and we do think that our more comprehensive toolkit, it should be available within the next month.
And we do have some questions rolling in.
Oh, okay.
So the first one is, for the student resource officers in public schools, what are we to do with ESDs located in schools? If possession, use, and purchase is not a criminal offense, we cannot take the device or product.
Again, if your school policy prohibits the possession or use of the product, then you may confiscate the materials as you would a tobacco product. It really is based on what the school policy applies to. So again, if you're a school resource officer and you would be in a situation where a youth is possessing an ESD or a cigarette, and your policy with respect to use and possession on campus also applies to electronic smoking devices. And Brooke, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the policies have been updated to include vape products. Yeah, we think almost all of the products, I mean, Brooke's saying all, so I'm going to say all of the jurisdictions have updated their school policies to include the vape products. So there's really no reason to look differently at vape products or ESDs and cigarettes, cigars, et cetera, at this time. You're going to be using the same principle, and that is it's a violation of school-based policy, and whatever action you would take in that scenario, again, confiscating the materials and reporting to whatever the appropriate authority is the youth's violation of the school-based policy. Is there more in there? I'm not, for some reason.
There are, yep. So another question that came in, what are the legal consequences for youth selling or distributing ESDs to other youth?
So there are none. So even for adults. So for example, if you are, 25 years old and you are, bad player and you sell a cigarette or an electronic smoking device to a minor, there's no code citation for that. There's no criminal or civil violation that you have committed at that point. The provisions that we discussed, both the civil and criminal provisions that Brooke discussed, apply only to licensed tobacco retailers. So to some extent, that could be considered a gap in the code, but we do know that youth are highly likely to be accessing their vape products both at the retail level as well as through what we call social sourcing. And Tobacco 21 gets at that social sourcing because while 15 and 16-year-olds may have access to 18 and 19-year-olds as their social sources, they're less likely to have 21 and up as their social sourcing.
Now the questions are coming in.
Yeah.
If the school system confiscates the ESD, are they required to return that personal property to the individual? We run into parents who come in and demand that their property, the ESD, be returned.
So that is not a question that's answered in any of the code provisions that we're talking about here. Again, because it is not a violation of state code for the youth to be in possession of the materials, I don't know whether there is a basis for retaining the product simply because it is a violation of local code. I think that would have to be addressed on a school policy basis. Happy to work with the school systems if this is not something that is explicitly addressed to determine what the legal parameters might be in that scenario.
Okay. If a store owner lives out of state and you don't know the owner's information to issue a citation, who do you place on the citation?
So you will still place on the actual citation the store owner, the name, or the name could be the name of the business. But in order to serve the store owner, you will locate the name and information of the resident agent. The resident agent is exactly what it sounds like. So a resident agent has to be somebody that's affiliated with that business who has agreed to accept service on the owner's behalf. They have to be in state. So in order to find the registered agent, you get the information from the tobacco license, and then you get on the State Department of Assessments and Taxation on that website, and that will get you the resident agent information. So even if the owner's out of state, it doesn't matter. You still properly serve the owner by serving the resident agent. And that's a little confusing, so we can answer more questions about that if you'd like.
Okay, and we have a request. Oh, go ahead.
We can see them now. I wasn't able to.
Okay, good.
So thank you. So there was some question about the local options slide. So I'm going to have Brooke pull that slide up and look at those questions while I answer another slide. There was a question someone asked or comment that SROs are not allowed to enforce school policy. That is something that has been raised by a couple of officers. I don't know. That may in fact be the case, that you're only there to enforce the actual code. But given that there have been literally over the course of a decade, at best a handful of citations issued to minors, and I don't know that any of them were in the school system context for minors who are violating the PUP laws, I don't see that using the citation, the fact that there was an existing code provision that the youth was violating versus a school policy for reporting the youth to the school system could or should make a difference. So again, I just want to reiterate, it doesn't appear that there were citations actually being issued to minors for violation of the PUP laws for possession or use on school property, but that perhaps that was used as the reason the SRO was reporting the child or sending the child through the administrator process at the school system. If it is accurate that for a particular school system, the SROs are only there to enforce state laws, then perhaps we need to look at that system for that particular school system to see what the actual role of the SRO could or should be. So I encourage those of you who believe that that is your scenario, please reach out to the LRC. Let's do some investigation into what the actual law requires or permits, and then we can move forward from there.
All right, so back to the question about local options. So I want to be clear. When I was here we go, local options. So local governments that have a law on the books that only prohibit the sale under the age of 18, that doesn't mean that it's okay to sell to 19 and 20-year-olds. When I'm talking about enforcement here, I just mean if you want to continue enforcing that law, you can, but it doesn't make it okay under state law that 19 and 20-year-olds are being sold these products. They can still rightfully be cited in theory by a state entity that we know logistically might not happen. It's not okay. It's just that you have the option to continue enforcing your code, because it is still not legal to sell to an 18 or to a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old, just like it isn't a 19 or 20-year-old. But what you enforce would be your decision.
Right, and the important thing to remember is if your local code does not change and remains at 18, you still are entitled under the Health General Article 24305 and 24307 to issue civil citations for sales to those under 21 as of October 1st. So you don't have to change your local law. If you want to enforce the law with respect to 18, 19, and 20-year-olds in that case, you'll have to use the citation form through the state code. I think Brooke is about to answer another one. So you guys are just rolling in with the questions. This is great.
Yeah. Talk about that. Okay. All right. So if we're looking at criminal citations, 10107, if they can only be issued by law enforcement, yes. So they can be, yes, that's right. So the criminal citation can only be issued by law enforcement. You can't use health officers or designees for that. And yes, you can cite both the store owner, the licensee, and or the clerk. So either or, if you want to cite both of them for the same instance, you can do that under the criminal law. It's just that for the civil citations under the Health General, it would only make sense to be citing the owner. So that's a distinction between the criminal and the civil. All right, so someone's asking a little bit, someone has a question here about enforcement. So how could local law enforcement cite the resident agent or licensee for selling to someone underage when they didn't see it occur? Well, I mean, you couldn't necessarily. You couldn't. But I want to be clear, the resident agent accepts service. They're not being cited. They are designated to be the affiliate of the business that receives service in the state. Because if a state has someone has a business, an owner has some kind of business in Maryland, you have to have a resident agent to accept service. Most of the enforcement that we're talking about are sting operations. These are programs set up by the local health department. There is typically going to be law enforcement or a health officer or designee present in the store that saw it happen. No one is necessarily expecting anyone to be issuing these citations outside of that in a situation where they didn't see it occur, they didn't have any personal knowledge of that. You got that one.
When are they getting
there? So I guess we had a question, and this is something that we can ask MDH to weigh in on. I don't think that they can't talk, so we'll have to get their response.
So someone asked the question of when the local health departments would start receiving their tobacco enforcement materials so that you can use them during your retailer education visits. And again, when we send out follow-up materials, we'll make sure we get that information from MDH and send it to you. So I am checking my phone to make sure no one. Okay, I thought maybe someone might have texted me to give us that answer. So sorry, I don't know the answer to that question.
Oh, and then just to clarify something I said about the criminal citations, somebody wanted to know if the clerk's the one that made the sale, can you cite the owner? Yes. The clerk made the sale, you can cite the clerk, you can cite the owner, or you can cite both. So I just wanted to reiterate that because I couldn't see what time that question came in. And we just heard from Dawn Berkowitz. So she says the materials are going to be sent the same time that they send them to the retailers. It will likely be in September. So thank you, Dawn.
You got a lot of real time.
Yeah. I'm not seeing anything else.
So no additional questions, and we are about 5 minutes away. Oh, wait a minute, did another one come in? Based on the conversation, am I correct? So here, the question comes in, based on our conversation, am I correct that a police officer cannot confiscate items as contraband from those who cannot purchase? Again, that is a question of criminal law, of which I don't think any of us here at the LRC are currently aware of what the provisions of a school-based violation being with respect to confiscation. So let's look at the question about school-based policy and confiscation separately, and we will follow up with folks on that. But the question of whether out in the real world, if you will, whether a police officer has the ability to confiscate from a minor a tobacco product or a vaping product, I do not believe with the repeal of the PUP provision, I don't believe that there is a basis for confiscation of that product because it is not unlawful for the youth to be in possession or using that product. Frustrating though that may be, I understand that. Again, that was the caveat at the beginning that, we are trying to inform you of what the law is, as is, and what the reasons were behind each of the provisions that are in there. And we know it can be frustrating. Some of the provisions can be frustrating. Anything else come in? That looks like it. Great. Well, again, thank you so much. This was a wonderful back and forth on the Q&A, which helps inform us and MDH as far as updating our FAQs and the materials that we're about to be releasing in their final form soon. And so hopefully we will be able to address a lot of these questions there. And again, for those of you who want to continue the discussion, particularly about the SROs and school policy, please get in touch with the Legal Resource Center. If there are enough of you who are interested, perhaps we'll schedule a conference call to go through the issues, and we can look at it on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your summer. Take care.